The Oregon Ducks are Indy-bound. The Big Ten announcing yesterday that Oregon had mathematically locked up a spot in the Big Ten championship game. The conference ran every scenario and the tiebreakers, and they determined that the worst the Ducks could do would be to finish second in the league. There are 10 tiebreaker scenarios in all. In 8 of them, they'd face either Ohio State or Indiana, but Penn State does still have a narrow path. Here are the Big Ten standings. Up to the minute, you see the Ducks and the Hoosiers on top. Oregon has a bye this week before finishing against Washington. Ohio State and Penn State behind them. And remember, the Buckeyes beat the Nittany Lions in State College. Then 3 teams at 4-3 in the league: Illinois, Iowa, and Minnesota. This subtle reminder: Saturday Big Ten tailgate in Columbus to set the scene for the Hoosiers and Buckeyes, as well as the rest of the day around the conference. Mike Hall, Tyvis Powell get things going. 10 a.m. Eastern, 7 Pacific, only on the Big Ten Network and the Fox Sports app. The Buckeyes will go into that game shorthanded. Some really tough news, as numerous media outlets are reporting that OSU starting center Seth McLaughlin is out for the year after tearing his Achilles in practice yesterday. McLaughlin transferred from Alabama. He's had a great year, was a mid-season All-American. He is the second O-lineman the Bucs have lost. He joins left tackle Josh Simmons. So Seth McLaughlin, you know, a guy who I think was under the microscope a little bit after his struggles for Alabama in the CFP last year with the snaps. He makes the move over to Ohio State. Man, he has played well. Just heartbreaking to see that. I know you have experienced a lot of injuries in your career, so certainly our heart goes out to him. What does this mean from an Ohio State team that, again, already has had to shuffle this offensive line once this year?
Well, it's a big deal, and my heart goes out to Seth, like you said, because I made the point calling the game last week, and then I felt we don't talk about transfer portal additions specifically for the offensive line as much. I thought he was one of the most impactful, if not the most impactful non-skill position transfer in college football. The Buckeye offensive line had been limited. That was what limited their ceiling in recent years. And he was a stable piece. Talking to Ryan Day and Chip Kelly, his leadership. The center position is so important. All communication starts from the inside out, okay? And he had a nasty streak. And the way Chip Kelly, they do their run scheme, they put a lot on that center, almost like a Jason Kelsey with the Eagles, where you have to snap the ball and occasionally you're pulling around. You have to have the ability to be athletic to pull around in space. You have to be nasty to be able to dig guys out on the inside. So this is a huge loss. And this is one of the big matchups this weekend because Indiana's defensive line and their defensive front, it's one of the more disruptive fronts in the conference as a whole. Sacks, TFLs, ability to win one-on-one matchups. This is a huge, huge deal. Very few teams can overcome losing one of their star offensive linemen. Now you lose 2. Josh Simmons was likely a top 50 pick. Seth McLaughlin playing at an All-American level. Like, he might have been the first center taken in the draft next year. I don't know. I don't know. I do know this. Because when Simmons went down, Donovan Jackson went from left guard out to left tackle. Carson Hinsman then had been playing left guard. He played center last year.
Yes.
So the positive in this is, you can put guys in at offensive line. Center's a different beast because of your ability to snap the ball and communicate. The positive is Carson Hinsman has experience snapping the ball.
As the starting center, right?
Exactly.
Not as a backup. I mean, he was their starting center last year.
And played well.
Right.
So that's at least, you could say, because center is a whole different game. At least you have someone with experience there. But make no mistake, this is a big, big deal. Understanding Ohio State wants to run the ball first. That's been the storyline all year. It's something to watch. It's really something to watch, but this is not the Indiana team of the past. Like, that defensive line is disruptive, they're dynamic, and they're mean. That's going to decide this game, frankly.
Okay, so you've seen both these teams in person. You saw Ohio State as recently as 5 days ago at Wrigley Field. So give me a sense of, like, where each team has the edge here.
Yeah, I mean, Ohio State, this is the way I see this is, if Ohio State plays their best game and Indiana plays their best game, Ohio State's going to win. I just think that that's where they're at as a program from a talent standpoint, from a resource standpoint. But no one plays their best game for 60 minutes. There's going to be mistakes and there's going to be opportunities. Where Ohio State has the edge, I believe, offensively, the outside. Guys like Jeremiah Smith, Emeka Egbuka, Carnell Tate, you can go down the list. Their skill positions as well. Indiana's Pons is probably their best corner. He's 5'9". Like, they don't have great size to necessarily match up with a guy like Jeremiah Smith. That being said, they're still going to want to run the ball. So with Indiana, the goal is to win the early downs, try to force Will Howard in that offense into 3rd and longs. When Indiana has the football, I think they have the advantage on the outside. Denzel Burke, I look at him and I look, when I watch Denzel Burke move, he's a $100 million NFL corner. But he hasn't played like that at times. Oregon was able to get after it. Igbinosun, the other corner, he's a guy you love to have on your team. He's extremely aggressive, to a fault at times. He's been, whether it's 3rd down, 4th down, he's been good for one critical error PI in big situations a game. Got to clean that up in this one, because I love Curtis Rourke. Is a gamer. That dude is a stone cold killer. He's going to stand in there. He stood in there in the pocket, took a shot by Mason Graham, and delivered like a 50-yard strike to Elijah Surratt down the sideline. I like both teams' ability to throw the ball. I think both teams are going to have success throwing the ball. Which team can dominate and win in the trenches and run the ball to control the clock?
It does feel like Ohio State's running it a lot better here, 170-plus yards in each of the last 3 games after they went for 201 total in the previous 2. So we'll see whether or not that run game continues against what is a very good Indiana defense. I am interested to see if Ohio State's defense struggles, because as you mentioned, like if you look at kind of what's the one game this year where one of these units had a tough time, it's Ohio State's defense in that Oregon game. Now you could say it's also Indiana's offense in the Michigan game, right? Which certainly in that second half, they didn't move the ball great. So I know you can kind of poke holes in each one of those teams, but that's the one that I wonder about. Last 4 games, Ohio State's been great. They've given up 2 offensive touchdowns the last 4 games. So they have really played well, but you do look back on that Oregon game, and again, Indiana is as dynamic as they come offensively. I mean, this is the second highest scoring team in the country.
And Ohio State's Jim Knowles has made some changes, and we saw the 3-down look a little bit against Purdue. They've made some changes. Jim Knowles he's an aggressive coordinator in general. I've noticed him, and I pointed it out against Northwestern, being even more aggressive, like bringing pressure. I look at that defensive line. That's an NFL defensive line. They should be able to win organically just bringing 4-man pressure, but for whatever reason, that hasn't been the case consistently. So Knowles is going to bring pressure. Curtis Rourke's decision-making is key. They run that RPO system, which is just like a game of math and space and leverage, and he makes great decisions. So the boogeyman, that's the one you got to keep an eye for. Caleb Downs solves problems. Right. Like you think you have space, you're running, it's great. Hey, coach, I'm going to get a first down. You look up, waving and say, hey, mom, how's it going? There's Caleb Downs, and he just smokes. He comes out of nowhere. So he's a guy that can change the game. Turnovers will be another thing, too. That's been a big emphasis for the Buckeyes defense.
I want to move on from this game, but I have one last question for you. How much do you think the fact that Ohio State has been there and Indiana hasn't will have an impact in this game? And I don't mean the programs. I mean the individual players. Like the Ohio State guys have all already played in huge games. This year. Obviously the Oregon game was immense for them, and then they had their backs up against the wall going to State College. I mean, that was a huge game. Indiana just hasn't had anyone who has played in a game of this magnitude at all on this roster.
There's 2 ways to look at it. For Ohio State first, they've played in big games, and Sonny Styles said this in a podcast last week. He said, we know what it's like to win games and lose the ones that matter down the stretch. I think that pain has made Ohio State come even closer together. That's a senior-heavy team that has experienced loss and are committed to winning the process. For Indiana, there's 2 ways to look at it. You could say the inexperience hurts you, or you could say, hey, you just go play free. You've earned the right to play confident. One thing, so Indiana's going on the road, they're traveling. You'll as a team, you'll have Friday night meetings, okay? So you'll eat dinner and then you'll go through your Friday night meetings. And each team has a specific department to make like a hype video. You always watch a hype video.
Right.
And it doesn't matter, sure. It's a subtle thing that it reminds you of who you are and what you're capable of. That hype video for the Hoosiers is going to be absolutely special. Cignetti called his shots last December, and every single day they've been working to reinforce that belief. I think this is a team, they got nothing to lose. No one's giving them a chance on the outside looking in. I believe they're very capable. I think all that makes them, this is a dangerous team because they're capable and they're counted out.
They are certainly counted out, right? I mean, no one operates with more of a chip on his shoulder than Curt Cignetti, right? He is trying to prove to the world that they made a mistake waiting until he was in his 60s to hire him as a head coach at a Power 5 school. And I feel like he wakes up every day trying to prove to everyone they were wrong. And then you think of where all these players came from, right? These aren't guys who were playing at Alabama and said, hey, I'm not making it here, or Ohio State or Michigan or wherever, and I'm going to go to Indiana. No, these are guys who, a few from the ACC and whatever, but I mean, we're basically talking about a group of 5 guys.
Yes, exactly.
So they all feel like they've been slighted too.
Absolutely.
Oh, it's a massive chip.
It's going to be fun.
It is really going to be fun. Hey, I do want to ask you about Penn State. I mentioned they still have a chance to get to Indy. It's a narrow path. A lot of it is out of their control. But what is in their control, I would say, is making it to the college football playoff here. If they win out, it feels like they're going to be in. This is a tricky game against Minnesota. What are you watching there against the Gophers?
Yeah, I'm watching the maturity first, because Penn State is a team where the only thing that's changed, let's say it goes according to plan and they go to the playoffs. Cool, you can celebrate that you went to the playoffs, but really the only thing that would change is the label of being able to be called a playoff team. This is a game, if Minnesota could be, if Missouri's ranked in the SEC, Minnesota has a case to be ranked, okay? Like they've done some nice things this year. They got hot for a little while. They're a dangerous team. The secondary of Penn State has to show up, because what's crazy, Minnesota under Brosmer, they're a pass-first team. Like, he's been leading them, and they're dangerous throwing the ball. I'm curious to see what the secondary does, because the further we go in the season, the playoffs, there's some great quarterbacks and great skill positions. And then for Drew Aller, it's the same thing where this guy's got all the talent in the world. You look at him, you say, that's an NFL quarterback with an NFL arm. He had his moment earlier. USC rose to the occasion, led his team on a big drive and left USC with the win. This is another one of those opportunities where you're going on the road, a critical game. All of our resources spent talking about Ohio State, Indiana, and some of the play. It's been quiet what Penn State has done in recent weeks. Drew Aller has to lead his team to victory.
And it won't be easy. This is a talented Minnesota defense. They have gone back to being an elite defense. You talk about what went wrong last year for Minnesota, and you can talk about quarterback play, and it wasn't great. It's hard to disagree with that. But to me, the biggest issue was they were not an elite defense. They were an average to slightly below average defense, and that just isn't what they've been under P.J. Fleck. But they're top dozen in the nation now. Once again, total defense, scoring defense, they're really good. So it's a challenge for Drew Aller.
Minnesota, last year, they were out of position. I just didn't think there was a trust for the 11 guys on the field. This year, they're almost all on a string. All 11 guys are playing as one unit, which makes it really hard to beat them.
It should be a really interesting game there, and they'll be charged up in Minneapolis. Up next, it was an off-season of change in the Big Ten. We knew that coming in. But an in-season of change as well, as it turns out. Jake and I will look at the most impactful moves coming up.